we're going to discuss the story behind two different Russian scientists who were just brilliant enough to theorize the possibility of reviving dead organs within dead bodies. What's going on, everyone, and welcome to In the Name of Science. We're your hosts, Chris Howard,
Josh Jacobs,
and Eddie Fernandez.
So today is an insane episode. So insane because we're going to discuss the story behind two different Russian scientists who were just brilliant enough to theorize the possibility of reviving dead organs within dead bodies, but also being just crazy enough to attempt it in the name of science.
Picture it. The year was 1926. The great Miami hurricane hits, inspiring the University of Miami's inaugural football team to claim the name and the reference to the devastating power of the storm.
So as a Miami native, born and raised, what up? I'd like to just give a shout out to the Miami Hurricanes, but I'd also like to give a reverse shout out to actual Miami Hurricanes. Okay, my first hurricane experience was in 1992 when I was 9 years old, Hurricane Andrew. It caused billions of dollars in damage, which meant nothing to me at the time. But now that I have to go buy eggs for $50 a carton, I suddenly understand. So yeah, you can suck at hurricanes. I hate your low pressure guts. I hope you die horrible, horrible high pressure cold water deaths.
But in the midst of what appears to be the foundation of pretty much all of Eddie's psychological drama, John Logie Baird conducts the first public demonstration of the television, Winnie the Pooh is published, and the Ford Motor Company establishes the first 40-hour work week for factory workers. But the most important one was the first SAT test is given to high school students. And I would just like to say that my daughter, who's 15 and a half, took pre-SAT test last year. Never seen an SAT test in her life. Got a 1080. I went and studied and got two separate SAT prep courses and finished with a 990. And I got 200 for signing my name. So really a 790.
So, back in my day, we didn't get 200 for signing the day, but shout out to your daughter, whose SAT score is officially high definition, 1080. I got a 1250 back in the day when 1600 was the high score.
None of that has carried over into my life. So that's why I'm doing podcasts, so I don't have to do any of that stuff.
But in 1926, something else that would change the course of history was beginning to rear its head. And yes, that pun is 100% intended, and we are going to be doing this all day long. Because in 1926, Sergei Bruhanyenko, a prominent Soviet physicist scientist, developed a method for perfusing a canine head and keeping it alive, using the first extracorporeal life support device called an autoinjector, which helped lay the groundwork for the future development of cardiac surgery. Now, before Chris and Eddie and I go any further, I just want our listeners to understand, I told you about my SAT scores. I had to actually go back and look up what perfusing and extracorporeal meant.
So I'm going to get close to my mic here. Extracorporeal. But
extracorporeal. I'm just saying. Listen, SATs.
Nuclear, tomato. I get perfusing, but extracorporeal, it seems like that's pretty easy to deduce, right? Outside of the body. Perfusing, on the other hand, I actually hadn't heard of before, and I think actually that might get us demonetized.
That's actually probably your first nerd alert, because Chris and I were both like, extra maybe, but corporeal? No, definitely not. We don't know that.
I was thinking like, when you beat your kid or something.
I thought you were going to say corporate punishment.
I'm going to give you an extracorporeal punishment.
Extracorporeal punishment for you, buddy. Listen, folks, we're going to get some of this wrong. These are some big words.
I'm fixing up some French names here in a few minutes, so we're good.
Now, perfusing, it's the word used to supply an organ or tissue with fluid, typically treated blood or blood substitute, by circulating it through the blood vessels or other natural channels. How do I know that personally, Eddie?
If you're a man, there's no need to explain. Sometimes a little Chewbacca needs to stand at attention.
Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you got a nut. You're not you when you're hungry. Anyways.
But before we dive head first, and yes, again, like Josh said, we're going to keep doing this all day. Let's go way back to the 1700s and understand how any of these crazy experiments, Bruhinko, did I say that right, Josh?
No.
Bruhinko,
Brew Hunyanko.
Hunyinko. Okay, we'll go with that. Would perform in the 1920s and 30s were inspired. Now, playing with electricity is not a new thing. People have been trying to harness the power of electricity for hundreds of years, but it was galvanic reanimation discovered by Luigi Galvani in the late 1700s that had heads spinning. Get it? Spinning. Giovanni accidentally discovered this type of science when his electrified scalpel caused a frog he was dissecting to twitch.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my darling. Hello, my ragtime girl.
Okay, 10 out of 10. Electrified scalpel. This guy was cutting off a genital warts or something. He just was on a date one day. He raised his lady skirt. He was excited with what he saw. She raised his skirt, or whatever men wore back then. I don't know. I'm not an Italian from that era. And she was just horrified. And so he invented the electrified scalpel to remove his genital warts. I mean, what possible other reason could there be for this? But I just keep thinking about, like, what happens when he grabs the scalpel and forgets to put on his rubber glove, and then all of the muscles in his hand just start waving around, and he stabs himself in the eyeball, and now he has a science pirate eye patch and genital wart scars from the electrified scalpel.
It's the depth perception that no one tells you about when you're a one-eyed pirate.
How am I supposed to capture me warts if I can't tell how far away they are? For real though, why is it that when a pirate gets hip dysplasia, they give him a peg leg, but your golden retriever just gets shot between the eyes?
Golden Retriever got shot between the eyes. That's how Old Yeller died, right? I mean, just a horrible, horrible movie if you ever saw it. But I remember.
I mean, like the old Captain Pegcrotch gets to keep walking around, increasingly disgusting. But Lassie, sorry, bro.
Eddie, I thought the whole thing is they just go to a nice farm upstate. What do you mean?
No, Josh. What I said was I shot Fido between the eyes, and all that's left is his bones. And speaking of bones, Galvani's nephew, Giovanni Albini, stood on the bones of his uncle and took Luigi's experiments to the next level.
And so it's probably that need for one-upsmanship that pushed Giovanni to start cutting off oxen and dog heads and poke them with electric rods and make them twitch. But this guy wasn't working out of some science lab. No, he was making a show of it. And people would come from all over the world to watch this crazy scientist take to the streets and make dead animals' heads twitch. But it was in 1803 when Giovanni got the bright idea to take the recently deceased murderer, George Foster, and insert electric rods into the corpse, ultimately manipulating the dead body.
So a local publication, the Newgate Calendar, wrote about this event, and here's what they said. On the first application of the process to the face, the jaws of the deceased criminal began to quiver, and the adjoining muscles were horribly contorted, and one eye was actually opened. In the subsequent part of the process, the right hand was raised and clenched, and the legs and thighs were set in motion. And as it turns out, this is where Mary Shelley got her inspiration to write Frankenstein.
I would also tend to say that, think about this. I'm going to say 2 words and see how much of nerds you truly are. Ready? Because this is what the whole Newgate Calendar description reminds me of. 2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Oh, the boy looking for his money. God,
Nope.
What's the name of that?
That's
movie?
$2, and that's better off
$2.
dead. Come on, I'm going to do it again. All right, I'll even do a little 2 weeks.
The Elephant Man?
You guys are you are not allowed to be on the Interracial Council of Nerds. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. It takes place on Mars.
Oh, Mars.
Total Recall.
Total
How
Recall.
did you point to the least quotable quote in one of the most quotable movies ever?
Yeah,
Are you
that's
kidding?
cool.
That 2 weeks is like the most famous, incredible part of that whole movie.
No, it's not. It's give the people the apple hang on. Or this.
All right, ready, Eddie? Dueling Schwarzeneggers. My
All right.
name is not Hauser, only
Get to
Quaid.
the chopper! Hey.
Come on, do it! I'm here! Come on,
I am you.
I'm here!
You are me. Come on, Quaid.
Those are excellent. I couldn't pick.
And my space horse's name is Space Schnitzel, and they give her oatmeal cookies every day. It's wonderful. Here on Mars, there's all kinds of stuff. It's difficult to work out though because there's a smaller amount of gravity, so I find myself sometimes getting the escape ascent vehicle and just, doing some overhead presses, doing a couple of deadlifts with this vehicle. Sometimes you could take off 2 engine bells and put them on either side of an axis from the rover and find you could do a good bench press. And it keeps me strong so that whenever I run out of air, I can tighten my body and keep the oxygen inside just... I've got a good fact for you, okay? Let's get to the chopper here. The fun fact is the maximum voltage a human body produces is about 2,000 watts during short duration and high impact exercises like sprinting. On average, it'll stick to about 100 watts at rest and can comfortably sustain 300 to 400 watts. For reference, a really bright LED light bulb will run at about 12 watts. So, 2,000 watts at maximum power. That's enough to get the subwoofer thumping 2 or 3 times. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so I'm just going to speak in my non-threatening black guy voice. So after Galvani and Aldini pushed things forward in the world of galvanic reanimation, it was, said Josh, Bruhenyenko in the early 1920s who was inspired by their experiments. Among his peers, he was well known for his knowledge of blood transfusion.
Before you do that, my breakfast just arrived, my DoorDash. You guys keep reading. I'm going to just grab it real fast. I just didn't want you to wonder why I was getting off the camera here. I had that bariatric surgery. I got this little baby stomach, and if I don't eat...
All right, go eat. Oh my God.
But Bruhenyenko wanted to go further and began to conduct experiments in resuscitation, ultimately inventing and creating the first working heart-lung machine. And for those of you who don't know what a heart-lung machine actually does, it was a way to provide the body with oxygenated blood while a patient is otherwise unable to, most notably to help with bypass surgery of heart transplants.
Sorry, I was just saying, all right, I'm back.
But to get to the success of such a machine, Bruhenyenko would have to get his head in the game. Yes, pun 4. Actually, not his head, but lots and lots of dog heads. Now, Chris, Eddie, and I, we all have dogs. We're dog lovers. We've had them for many years. We've had multiple dogs. We love them all dearly. But this part of the story, while fascinating, you might want to, maybe just listen to this part. We hope you stay with us because as mad as it makes us to think that these poor animals are, being grotesquely experimented on, the story itself is truly beyond belief.
Okay, so I absolutely love dogs. All right, I love them.
This is getting ready to go left.
For the sake of science, right, let's just say, hypothetically, that I took my Chihuahua mix's head and lopped it off and put it on top of some sort of like a generator. How much electricity would that generate? Purely for science, okay? I'm not advocating any kind of like weird herding dogs or anything. But I mean, this dog was diagnosed with a heart murmur, and I was told he had maybe a year to live, okay? This was 4 years ago. He won't die. He just keeps bouncing around. This dog is like an electron, okay? It just bounces back and forth through time, and every time it passes through the present frame, it creates another instance of itself. He is everywhere, all at the same time.
Bruhenyenko's ultimate intention was to create the world's first heart-lung machine, and it was the invention of the auto-injector that was the defining moment in his career.
The auto-injector was a machine he invented made up of automatic pumps, a reservoir for blood storage, and 2 tubes that would inject and extract blood into whatever the machine was trying to resuscitate. But he wasn't satisfied with just the initial invention and needed a way to up the ante. So he began to experiment on dogs. At first, he worked towards taking the dogs' hearts and have them continue to beat outside their bodies. Then he did the same thing with their lungs. Then he started getting even crazier and going all Dr. Hannibal and decided that he wanted to keep a severed dog's head conscious and even bring it back to life after it died. And miraculously, he succeeded. All of this can be seen in this creepy film called Experiments in the Revival of Organisms from 1947.
Clarice, do you remember the lambs? Do you remember the crying of the lambs?
Is it strange that I'm turned on right now?
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
During the movie, the most insane part is what Chris, Eddie, and I first came across all those years ago that spurred us to want to create In the Name of Science. There's this dog's head on a metal table with all these tubes in its neck, and the auto injector starts up, and all of a sudden you start to see the dog's eyes like widen and twitch, and the mouth opens, and some kind of food, and it licks its nose. I can't lick my nose. Eddie, can you please lick your nose? Yeah, you can't do it either. Okay.
Thank God I did not need to see Eddie with the capability of looking at his nose, because then my mind would go somewhere else.
When I lose enough of this midsection weight, I might be able to lick something else.
So let's just move on. Full disclosure, I couldn't watch the next part of this movie, but I read about it, and at the end of the movie, they drain the blood from this dog's head, and they leave it for 10 minutes. Then they connect the dog to the auto-injector, pump the blood and the oxygen back in, and the dog's resurrected. But these lunatics also say the dogs lived normal lives after that, and I think it's just straight propaganda that and so do a lot of other people, that these dogs lived healthy lives.
But the more we read, the more we found out that certain things were just not true. Contrary to what the narrator says, the dog's head only survived a few minutes after it started the auto-injector. And those dogs that went on to live the happy life, not so much. Most came out brain damaged and didn't live more than a few days. But in the end, I hate this guy's name. Whatever, Russian. But in the end, Bruhenyenko moved the science enough to establish the foothold needed to begin the final push to a working heart-lung machine. So, just when you think the story is over, it is for Bruhenyenko, but for Vladimir, Josh?
Demikhov.
Is it Demikhov?
Demikhov.
Demigod.
Demikhov.
Yeah.
Demogorgon?
Yes, that's it right there. That's his name from here on out. It's Demogorgon. That's his new name. A well-known scientist in the field of organ transplants. Things were heating up.
So this Demogorgon / Demikhov / demigod was born in 1916 to peasant parents. He lived on a small farm in northern Russia somewhere. And Demikhov began to show an interest in science at an early age and was inspired by Pavlov's experiment working with dogs. So most of you have heard of...
Josh, pause 1 second. You mentioned Pavlov and salivated.
Rewind.
Most of you have heard of the Pavlovian response as a term, but let me give you a quick example. When I hear the opening to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack, I immediately get goosebumps, and according to Eddie, also a boner, because I'm such a massive fan of the series. And when I saw each movie in the theater for the first time and heard that opening music, I got goosebumps. No boner in the theater, that's inappropriate. So I was ultimately conditioned to get goosebumps in anticipation of the great musical score that would lead into feeling of excitement and immense joy and seeing how much all of these three movies just bring me so much happiness. In Pavlov's classic experiment, he trained a hungry dog to salivate at the sound of a buzzer, which was previously associated with the sight of food. And I can guarantee that Chris's Pavlovian response is no doubt. What is it, Chris?
The smell of fresh Krispy Kreme donuts on any day.
Oh, dude.
Once he smells that, he starts to just uncontrollably salivate.
Damn you, Josh, and your psychological donut warfare.
In 1937, Demikhov, also known as Demogorgon, created the world's first artificial heart and successfully put it into a dog. And the dog survived 2 hours after surgery. So he took this technology and after World War II moved to Moscow and continued with his experiments. And these survival rates on these dogs went from 2 hours to several weeks. And then in 1953, he transplanted a heart into a dog and the dog went on to live for 7 years. Now, we don't know if this is all true per se. It could just be propaganda, but it's important to remember that when your beloved family member who has been sick for so long finally gets on the top of that transplant list and gets a few extra years of precious time with you, that countless dogs are brutally murdered for them to survive. Your family member is a horrible person, and you are too.
And that is in the name of, it was all done in the name of science.
It happens. So all this is amazing and catapulted the science around organ transplants. But then around 1954 is where Demogorgon, with Demigod, whatever, started to go off the rails, because that's when he unveiled the world's first surgically created two-headed dog. He basically took the head, neck, and front shoulders and paws of a smaller dog and put them on the neck of a German Shepherd. And unlike the Severed Dog's Head movie that was filmed in an undisclosed lab, which opens the legitimacy up for discussion, Demogorgon would film his experiments in public. You can find the dogs at the Medical History Museum in Latvia, along with Dr. Doom.
Damn it, I was gonna just say that. You beat me to the nerd.
That's Latveria.
Listen.
Okay, Mr. Sandwich Eater.
Seriously, stop eating. This is supposed to be professional freaking podcast / whatever.
Oh, that boat sailed long ago.
Oh, right. I'm sorry.
I'm just working on my Pavlov.
Now, the last story comes from Gizmodo.com, Australia, from 2011, entitled The Story of Dog Head Transplants and the Giant Dog Bot That Never Was. As the article starts off to say, during the 1950s, a team of communist scientists from Moscow University and the Soviet Academy of Sciences, led by Dr. Vladimir Demikhov, worked on a creation of a giant robot controlled by a dog head in a secret facility created by none other than Joe Stalin. However, it seems that while the whole thing is completely false, the schematic drawings for the robot and what appears to be legit photos of a giant robot with an open area at the top for a head to be placed in are actually on the internet. Even if it isn't true, it literally looks like the cross between Robbie the robot from Lost in Space and the robots in Avatar that the humans operate, the exoskeleton thingies, except only enough space for a dog's head.
So it's pretty wild to imagine that basically a century ago in the Soviet Union, they were already doing essentially what Neuralink is doing today, except they were cold, heartless killers, because dogs are the best. And Neuralink's working on monkeys, and they have those cold, black, scary eyes. They'll rip faces off. They're terrible. Monkeys are the worst. But this idea of controlling devices using your brain, it's been with us forever. I mean, look at Luke Skywalker. Look at Anakin Skywalker. They had limbs severed off, and then they got robo arms that they controlled with their brains. So the search for longevity and better quality of life, it's been with us so long that at this point, it's basically a foundational trait in humanity. It's like right next to eat, sleep, survive, and procreate. So while it's important to remain in constant search of some level of progress, because we do want to improve our lives, we want to move ahead, it's important that we don't do it at the expense of other lives, because devaluing one life to increase the value of another life is a net negative. It always is. And so I think it's always important to take a second and a third look at the way we chase our stated goals, because bringing value to human life by devaluing other lives, it's a slippery slope. The ends don't always justify the means, and we can do better. And I know I kind of went on my little preaching thing there, but you know, the burrito's done, so I care again.
All right, folks, so that's it for this episode of In the Name of Science. We have tons more creepy and off-the-rail discoveries to talk about. We will probably go off the rails as well. But if you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. And remember, if it ain't weird, it ain't science.
Science!